over the next 20 minutes or so, I'll hear exactly what Fidelity has found. Why their $1.4 million figure Americans have been chasing is falling apart in censorship. What real retirees actually keep in their accounts, and 5 specific risks in deciding whether to keep or run out of money, no matter how big it looks today. For people 45 to 65, the next 20 minutes will reshape your view of retirement, not anything else you see this month. Part 1, what numbers do you think you need, and what numbers do real retirees actually have? Let me start with the blanks that make up the whole conversation. According to a recent Fidelity survey, Americans believe they need to save about $1.4 million to retire comfortably, a figure that fluctuates with the number of dreams people whisper as they stare at their 401 balance on Sunday night. Reality is completely different from fantasy. In the same Fidelity research, real retirees reported an actual figure of about $490,000, or only a third of the amount required to take an oath before retirement. Don't mention the gap, because it explains the great anxiety surrounding the topic. Despite the shortfall, 72% of recent retirees told Fidelity that their retirement was on track. 70% thought they had saved the right amount of money, and 69% acknowledged that their retirement was happier than expected. The finding embarrassed the financial advisory industry. If people who retire on $500,000 report real satisfaction, the $1.4 million target sold to retirees is at best an extremely inflated benchmark and a marketing tool to keep people fearful, extend working hours, and charge the agency that originally sold them fear. Kenny Davin, a registered financial planner and vice president in Fidelity's Fort Lauderdale office, bluntly pointed out this in the company's own opinion piece. Rather, he said, some ended up making $1 million, while others made $3 million to $5 million, struggling because they spent a lot of money or took on major obligations such as supporting family members, all for details done. This sentence carries weight and will look back, because Devon tells you in the record that the dollar amount on your statement is not a variable that determines whether you sleep at night. Section 2, loyalty, confidence swings. That is where the timeline has become interesting, and the hidden story of Fidelity's annual study has begun to emerge. As early as March 2025, Fidelity released a previous survey on the status of retirement plans, which found that retirees' retirement confidence had collapsed, falling by a full 7 percentage points to 6 to 7% in a year. Persistent inflation, rising healthcare costs, and the tightening of the cost of living in the US budget since 2022 are all the culprits. 12 months later, in March 2026, Fidelity released its next edition and confidence rebounded. 72% of Americans now expect to retire on their terms, 5 percentage points higher than the previous figure, and 74% say they have actual plans to achieve their retirement goals. On the surface, it sounds like a recovery story. Another level, however, leads to another picture. According to the same study in 2026, 51% of Americans said the rising cost of living had been competing with their ability to save for retirement. 28% were still struggling with personal debt, And the main short-term concerns keeping them awake at night were 36% inflation, 35% monthly bills, and 27% emergency spending, while the underlying financial pressures have not eased. The rise in confidence raises a real question. What do people have more confidence in? The answer hidden in the details is that Americans don't feel better about their savings, and they even feel better about what it means to redefine retirement. Today, 61% plan to retire rather than stop cold-blooded work. 35% plan to take temporary or part-time jobs. 29% are considering starting small businesses, and 20% are preparing to revolutionize the industry. This is not a rebound in confidence, but a reshaping of failure into flexibility, as Fidelity's own data confirm. 52% of Americans who said they would never retire acknowledged that the real reason was that they could not stop working altogether. Section 3. Why can More Money solve the problem? If you don't remember the rest of the video, grab it, because it carries the core insight that Fidelity quietly hands you. The reason more money doesn't cure retirement anxiety is that retirement security isn't primarily a balancing function, but the difference between your monthly guaranteed income and your monthly basic expenses. Over the past 30 years, the math for that gap has gotten very bad. Social Security has replaced about 40% of the earnings of ordinary workers in the US before retirement, according to the Social Security Administration. The remaining 60% of basic bills such as housing, utilities, groceries, insurance, and healthcare will be funded by a volatile, inflation-eroded portfolio. Depending on the smart withdrawal decisions you make before age 80 or 90, the pensions that have filled the gap for generations have largely disappeared. The National Institute on Retirement Security reported in February that only about 14% of Gen X workers had pension plans, meaning that the bridge supporting baby boomer retirement had been demolished before Gen X had a chance to cross the bridge. That is the structural reason $1 million no longer feels like $1 million. Taking 4% of $1 million portfolio each year generates $40,000 a year. A precise mathematical formula that Devon detailed in his Fidelity Views article, asking whether $40,000 really covers these bills. His answer depends entirely on whether you have a pension or other guaranteed income, because without a pension, those 40,000 people must do everything. And that withdrawal rate can permanently damage the portfolio when a bad market hits you in the first 5 years of your retirement. The Fidelity report cites Morningstar S2025 research to confirm this pattern. In the first 5 years after retirement, retirees with low wages who refuse to adjust their spending are more likely to run out of money altogether. The technical name is the return risk sequence, but the actual translation is simpler. Retirement time is almost as important as how much money you bring to retirement, and no amount of savings can completely eliminate the time problem. Fidelity's research also exposed a behavioral issue that is rarely discussed publicly in the industry. The company's own opinion article cited a study in the Journal of Financial Planning that showed that many retired families spent far less than they could actually afford. Holidays have been slashed, gifts to grandchildren have shrunk, and basic spending has been delayed. all because screams of fear of running out are louder than math that tells them everything is normal. Mr. Devon described this directly in Fidelity's article, saying that some of our best savers became our most hesitant consumers because they were afraid to withdraw their accounts and end citations. The cruel irony is that the same discipline that builds the nest has become a prison, preventing anyone from enjoying it. Section 4, Fidelity, top 5 risks actually determine whether your money is sustainable. In Fidelity's View study, the company listed 5 specific risk categories that, in their analysis, determined whether retirement portfolios would survive. These are not views, but variables that their planners propose when they sit down with clients. Whether they hold 500,000 or 5 million in their accounts, longevity comes first, which means how long your money must last. Today, 65-year-olds are 25% more likely to be over 94, meaning that 30 years of retirement is no longer the worst case scenario, but a planning baseline. If your dropout math assumes you die at 82 and you actually live to 96, the whole structure has collapsed over the past decade. Inflation is second, hitting retirees more than at any time since the early 1980s. According to the latest Fidelity survey, 37% of Americans believe that rising prices are one of the biggest challenges to preparing for retirement, while 81% believe that retirement healthcare is particularly expensive. Fidelity's own estimate of retiree healthcare costs for single people retiring in 2025 is $172,500, used only to cover healthcare costs not covered by Medicare, which does not include long-term care at all. Healthcare came in third, and Fidelity considered it a separate category because unpredictability was in its own category. Of retirees who told Fidelity they did not have a healthcare plan, 57% said the costs eventually exceeded expectations, and 43% acknowledged that Medicare coverage was lower than expected. While most Americans are not eligible for Medicare until age 65, they face uncertainties about premiums, cost sharing, prescription fees, and upcoming long-term care, all of which are completely excluded from Fidelity's estimates. The withdrawal rate is fourth, which means the proportion of your portfolio you withdraw annually. Fidelity's guidance is consistent with most mainstream financial planning studies, with inflation-adjusted annual interest rates of 4 to 5% for typical 30-year retirees. But for early retirees over the age of 50, the company recommends lowering them to close to 3%, because the longer they retire, the more sensitive they are to early bad cake rankings. This positioning adds to the list, which means whether your portfolio structure will really grow decades after retirement. Fidelity's advice here is one of the more useful frameworks for their research. Cover basic expenses with guaranteed income, such as Social Security, pensions, or annuities, and then use the combined withdrawals only for discretionary expenses. The logic is simple. During a bear market, you should never be forced to sell stocks just to pay for electricity, because that is how retirees break even with healthy account balances. Section 5, savings shortages. No one wants to acknowledge. Now, let me tell you why this conversation is more important than any other retirement video you've seen this year, because the macro data is really worrying. The National Institute on Retirement Security reported in February that the median retirement balance for positive savers was $40,000. If you count all workers ages 21 to 64, including those with little savings, the median working age population will fall to $95.5. It is increasingly clear that only about 3.2% of American retirees hold retirement accounts of $1 million or more, according to a finding by Yahoo Financial Data. The company compiles multiple sources. A $1 million retirement is not the norm, but an anomaly of the elite, where the vast majority of Americans enter or live with only a small fraction of the standard savings discussed in the financial media. Fidelity sees the gap widening from within. As of September last year, 654,401 accounts of the company S account holders broke through the $1 million mark, and Fidelity data hit a record high. At the end of 2025, the average balance of 401 accounts was $140,600, an increase of 11% in the whole year. If you sit in this sample, these numbers look strong, but they describe a group of people they choose who get a workplace plan, contribute through volatility, and register long enough to compound interest. The median number of American workers is well below that. This is where the population clock begins to tick loudly. According to LIMRA data, at the current peak of 65, about 4.1 million Americans will turn 65 every year, the largest group of new retirees in American history, with a large number of people arriving at the door without pensions and enough savings, while Social Security itself faces what trustees say is the exhaustion of OASD trust reserves by the end of 2034, when benefits will automatically fall to 8.1% of the predetermined level. The committee responsible for the federal budget estimates that a typical couple who retires shortly after the bankruptcy point may see $18,400 a year in benefit cuts. The difference between living barely and not living for most middle-class retirees. Section 6, accidental exposure of psychological loyalty. There is a behavioral pattern hidden in Fidelity's research that explains why so many savers still feel financially insecure, as is clear from data on what anxious retirees actually do. Among retirees who told Fidelity they were worried about running out of money, 6 to 9% responded to spending cuts, 32% sought additional jobs, and 18% relied on home equity, usually through reverse mortgages or helicopters. The numbers describe a population that is not really bankrupt and is afraid of bankruptcy. A fear-driven choice that often makes things worse. Cutting costs sounds cautious until you realize that retirees who already don't have enough income are now cutting wages further, depriving them of 40 years of affordable travel, family experience, and day-to-day comfort. Going back to work in your 70s is a reasonable choice, but as a panic response to portfolio anxiety, it suggests that the original retirement plan has never been properly stress tested. Using net worth to introduce leverage and complexity into a stage of life where most people should reduce leverage and complexity at the same time. Allianz's 2025 retirement study captured the current emotional weight in one statistic. 64% of Americans now worry more about running out of money than dying. Third, it is listed as one of the most disturbing survey data of modern personal finance. Older people's fear of financial collapse has surpassed their fear of death itself, an anxiety that persists across income levels, portfolio size, and generations. Fidelity quietly concluded that money alone could not solve fears unrelated to money. Fidelity does not advertise on billboards, but runs through every recent study. It is the structural reality that uncertainty, the lack of guaranteed monthly income floors, the cognitive load of managing portfolios in their 80s, and the safety net that previous generations relied on is being dismantled and no other options are being established. Section 7, what Fidelity says is actually valid. That is where the study is really useful, because loyalty is not just a diagnostic problem. And the variables the company publishes in its data distinguish between confident retirees and anxious retirees. The big discovery was shocking. Americans with written financial plans are more than twice as confident about their retirement prospects as Americans without written financial plans. The exact data from the 2026 study showed that planners had a confidence level of 8 to 3%, compared with 38% for non-planners. 45, this is the whole gap, driven purely by the existence of plans rather than the size of the underlying portfolio. Rita Asaf, Vice President of Retirement Products at Fidelity Investments and Chief Spokesman for the study, said in a March 2026 news release that retirement was being redefined on the grounds that retirement was no longer a single date, but the adaptation phase of the next chapter, and the importance of planning became more apparent as Americans tended to new retirement scripts, translated from corporate language. Asaf tells you that the people who plan are those who feel safe, and those who skip the plan, regardless of their balance, are still anxious. The second variable involves whether you work with financial professionals. Fidelity's research found that respondents who regularly consulted with one were less likely to worry about their finances, and retirees who worked with one were more likely to feel confident that their savings would continue. This is not just Fidelity's rhetoric, but also reflects a pattern of behavior established in independent research. Although the company clearly benefits when people use consultants, people who externalize analysis to qualified third parties sleep better because they are not the only ones who focus on the future. Account consolidation is the third variable. Americans report that there are an average of 6 employers in a profession, and nearly a quarter of retirement savers are still processing multiple accounts scattered between past and current employers. Fidelity's view, supported by a 2022 study by the University of British Columbia, is that this differentiation directly leads 41% of workers to cash in 401 pensions when they change jobs, usually subject to tax penalties, and permanently undermines their compound interest curve. Transferring these accounts to the IRA or the current employer program is one of the easiest mechanical fixes, and it is less expensive to implement. The income structure represents the fourth variable, especially Fidelity's so-called guaranteed income, which is used to cover basic expenses. As pension coverage collapsed, the company's debate intensified. Retirees should look at their non-negotiable monthly vouchers, subtract their guaranteed income from Social Security and any pension, and seriously consider filling the remaining gap with something that can produce predictable checks, whether in the form of deferred income annuities, single premium instant annuities, or other guaranteed products. Tom Awanich, Vice President of Fidelity Investment Life Insurance, described the psychological effects of building guaranteed income levels. Stepping out of wait-and-see market anxiety and ending quotes, no matter what happens in the next few years. Section 8, warnings and trade-offs. Frankly, Fidelity doesn't tell you anything in the marketing version of the study because it has a business interest in selling planning services, consulting, relationships, and annuity products, all of which appear in the recommended solutions. This commercial benefit does not invalidate the data, but the framework deserves careful study. Fidelity emphasizes annuity as a tool to close the income gap, but the company itself acknowledges that it brings real trade-offs. Once you give a sum of money to an insurance company in exchange for a lifetime of income, the money is gone and you can't recover it in an emergency. Fixed costs are not adjusted for inflation unless you pay an additional cost of living surcharge. The guarantee depends on the issuer's financial strength, and if you die prematurely, the total amount paid may be less than the original amount. None of these are deal breakers, but they describe the kind of detail that can be obscured when advisors charge commissions based on recommendations. According to LIMRA data, total annuity sales in the United States reached a record $464.1 billion in 2025, the fourth consecutive year of record sales, and a large part of the growth can be traced to the same peak 65 wave we discussed. Demand is real. Demographic pressures are real. But whether any particular annuity is suitable for any particular retiree remains a personal issue that requires personal analysis, preferably from a fee-only consultant who does not charge a commission based on the recommendation. Section 9, list of practices in the study for people ages 45 to 65. The study points to a fairly clear order. If you want to translate Fidelity's findings into practical actions you can take this month, sit down and list your monthly non-negotiable expenses like housing, food, insurance, healthcare, utilities, and basic transportation, because that number represents your base price. Then add up your estimated monthly Social Security income and all pensions. The difference between these two numbers is your income gap, the most important number in your retirement plan, more important than your portfolio balance. If your guaranteed income covers more than half of your necessities, you have flexibility. You can put more weight on your portfolio, and you have room to absorb market volatility without panic. If your guaranteed income is less than half the necessities. Dana Ansbach, a wealth planner at Fidelity Research Report, said annuities deserved serious consideration because in a bad market, the structural gap is too large to bridge portfolio withdrawal alone. In addition to income calculations, the Fidelity 2025 study highlighted 3 savings plans that were underutilized before retirement. Only 42% of respondents contributed to deferred income tax retirement accounts, such as IRA and 401s. Only 36% took full advantage of employer 401 matching, and a few used health savings accounts as long-term retirement vehicles. Despite their triple tax advantages, properly executed, these 3 steps can meaningfully reshape your retirement math over a 5 to decade window, provide sufficient funding for your deferred tax account, get a perfect match, and set HSA to maximum if you qualify, starting in 2025 thanks to Secure 2.0. Individuals ages 60 to 63 will be eligible for what the legislation calls a workplace plan super catch-up contribution, the closest the system has offered retirees in years. Outro, real takeout. Here are the conclusions that Fidelity does not speak simple English, but the study clearly supports them. Retirement protection is not a destination that can be reached by clicking on a magic number. It is a structure built by matching guaranteed income to basic expenses, consolidating decentralized accounts, writing down actual plans, and accepting that the most important variable is not how much you own, but how you organize what you own. Retirees who sleep well now don't necessarily have the greatest balance. They are the people who built the system. Sleep-deprived retirees are not always the smallest portfolio. They often never translate their savings into a coherent income strategy. Fidelity's most troubling finding is that if you don't plan what the money should do, the other $100,000 in your account won't make you feel safe. This finding runs counter to 40 years of financial advice focused on accumulating. Modest portfolios, combined with strong planning, predictable revenue, and disciplined spending, tend to outperform larger passively managed portfolios. For anyone 45 to 65, the window to fix this problem is open, but it won't open forever, because every year you delay the transformation of savings to structure, lose compounding time, lose the leverage of tax planning, lose the runway to absorb the bad market without permanently destroying retirement life. The study is on the table, the numbers are real, and the strategy is clearer than the financial industry usually admits. What you do in the next 12 months matters more than your statement today. This is the true version of Fidelity's startling discovery, which is why more money alone can never cure your retirement worries.